Keith Olbermann has once again lost his mind. After the mass shooting in Michigan on Monday, before all the facts came in, he went on a rant on Twitter about how blue states should have an economic civil war against red states. As always, I don't think Olbermann thought it through before clicking the I am stupid button. Let's get into it.
We are owned by guns, and therefore there is only one way to stop the mass shootings. It is to suffocate the businesses that make billions of dollars in profits off guns, to destroy the gun lobby, the death lobby, and the Republican Party that defends those lobbies and those businesses. And the only way to do that is an economic civil war. The blue states have all the money. They must starve the red states into submission, or another 600,000 Americans will be murdered in the next 10 to 12 years.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we are the antidote to the daily onslaught, radical woke Marxist propaganda. So Keith Olbermann is known as a lunatic who can't keep a job with a network because he always crosses a line, even for left-wing producers. Now think about what he's saying about fellow Americans. He wants to economically starve red states in a civil war. To economically starve red states means to harm the American citizens who live in those states. He just wished evil on half of America. Can you imagine if Tucker Carlson said something like that? So Olbermann wants to see blue states have an economic war against red states because of guns in America. And he said this after the Michigan mass shooting earlier this week. But he forgot to mention that Michigan is run by Democrats in the executive branch. They are blue. Okay, so 3 people were killed in the mass shooting at Michigan State University. And there were only 2 ways for people in the misinformation fake news media to talk about it. Either we'd find out the shooter was white, which would start a conversation about white supremacy no matter what the person's reason for the shooting, or we'd find out that the shooter wasn't white, and then we would start a conversation about guns. That seems to be how the misinformation fake news media rolls these days. They are overwhelmingly left-wing, they are anti-gun and anti-self-defense. And these days, they blame everything on white people because that's what the woke supremacy tells them to do. So within hours of the shooting, police did release surveillance footage of the shooter. And it was pretty clear then how things would go. The shooter's past and why he did it no longer mattered. Motive of the shooter is never a factor when they can't check off woke boxes. They love to blame the inanimate object if it's not a white male who doesn't date men. That was quickly pushed by everyone from MSNBC host to the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who in response to a shooting done with a handgun brought up assault weapons that hold 50 to 70 bullets. It is insufferable to have to listen to left-wing lunatics who suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, acting like they're expert authorities on subjects that they know very little to nothing about. Enter Keith Olbermann, who is a loony leftist in his own right. He tweeted out an anti-gun invective blaming Republicans, red states, and a crooked judiciary for gun crimes. The Second Amendment means nothing to dipwads like Olbermann. And as usual, like all leftist fools, Olbermann blamed the inanimate object, the guns, instead of where the blame really belongs, with the criminals who abuse guns to commit violent crimes. It's always the same thing with these guys, these leftist anti-gun zealots. It's amazing how these morons think. A criminal with a gun goes and shoots up a bunch of people, and guys like Olbermann immediately want to punish all law-abiding gun owners who never did anything like that. That would be like saying a guy commits bank fraud, therefore nobody should be able to have a bank account. And you never hear them say that the criminal who did the act should be the one punished. They never talk about the criminal, do they? Olbermann just runs his mouth with the first thing that comes to mind. He never thinks about it first. He should be dismissed as a man in decline. He's a walking example of what years of lying, anguish, hypocrisy, and pointless anger can do to a person's mental health. The effects of living like this will ultimately become apparent after a while. To concoct poisonous hatred for no reason at all involves a lot of work. And no matter how many times his diatribes fail and he gets called out for being a radical lunatic, it never ends with this guy. So he said he wants blue states to financially starve the red states. Well, I hate to break it to him, but the red states are where all the food is grown, at least the majority of it. For example, Texas has far more cattle than California. Red states like Texas also produce more oil and gas than California, and Texas is more than a dozen times larger than California in the energy sector. So if Olbermann wants to have a civil war, he should pick easier targets, don't you think? I also think that people who live in red states know how better to survive in nature than people in blue states. Remember during Hurricane Sandy, I remember that it was revealed that in New York City, most people don't keep food in their apartments beyond a day or two's use. People who lived in those giant skyscraper apartments would go to the market every day and purchase their food. They were like Europe, right? People in blue states don't grow their own food for the most part. I'm not talking about farmers. I'm talking about regular schmoes who don't know how to plant anything that they're going to eat. Most people in the South grow their own food all the time. I'm willing to bet that Olbermann's rant came from the left-wing nonsense that has been going around for years, where leftists like to say that blue states support red states and that red states take more money from the federal government than blue states. Now, forget the fact that these lies have been debunked 6 ways from Sunday. Most left-wing lunatics still push them. Many red states get more federal dollars because there are more federal facilities in those states. Military bases cost money to run and maintain. Federal prisons do too. Leftists mistakenly see dollar figures and they think that the residents in those states are actually dividing up the money, right? That's because they're morons. Most leftists are dumb people. Also, the elderly people in this country, they typically move down south when they retire because it's a warmer climate. The South has more red states than blue states. Florida, for example, has a larger population than New York. That's the truth. Look it up. Elderly retired people collect Social Security, which comes from the federal government. But the loony leftists, the morons, they think that everybody is getting that money. It's not true. Okay? It's just not. Any way you look at it, a blue state civil war against red states would end up creating a climate like Kurt Schlichter's People's Republic, which is a book that I think was way ahead of its time. I'm going to put a link to it down in the description, and you should read it. It's really well done. It's fun to read, too. I highly recommend it. In the book, there was a civil war between the left and the right, and they created their own two countries. The People's Republic was inhabited by the lefties, and they are starving and miserable in no time. But Schlichter was ahead of his time because he used a lot of the crazy, goofy, left-wing woke language that the woke use today, but he wrote this years ago. Now, Keith Olbermann has never been known to think before clicking that submit button. Most people today would see his headlines, roll their eyes, and think, there he goes again. And I guess we're going to have to chalk up this little rant to the same thing. Okay, so that's it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for spending time with us. We'll see you in the next one.